very big welcome to the second of our Race Equality Week events, tackling bias, recruitment, development and progression to address racial inequality. I'm Tulsiani, I'm the Chief Executive of Green Park and today's chair. I'm also the chair of Race Equality Matters, which founded with Javed of the Collaboratory and 9 other minority-owned businesses. So thank you very much for joining us. It's fantastic to have so much support here today. We're expecting attendees from over 300 organisations and over 1,000 people have requested to join or to get the video recording. We're all looking for answers and the opportunity to collaborate. So attendees are registered attendees are in 200 different cities and towns, including Norwich and Ipswich, Basingstoke, Birmingham, Sheffield, Leeds, Doncaster, Bristol, and across Europe, including organisations based in Dublin, Munich, Copenhagen, Paris, Milan, and people as far away as Trinidad and Tobago, Colombia, and the United States. Before we start, as will be customary, some housekeeping. We'll be recording this event for you to access later along with the slides. So not just for you, for your organizations, for your networks. One of the principal founding pillars of what we're trying to do here is to encourage collaboration, not to fight over the same pot, but to drive forward with a unified purpose. Your sound will be auto-disabled, so no heckling, but if you do have questions along the way, please do put them in the chat and we'll try to cover them during the session. Please tweet and post social media content during and after the event so we can create a big Race Equality Week buzz. We are trying to get to 3.5 million people in work with allies this week. So you'll see our handles on the right. And remember, this is really about #action, not words, or not just words. None of this would be possible without the support of our partners who, alongside Green Park, are funding Race Equality Matters. So a huge thank you to them, lifetime visionary partners, British Telecom, and our founding partners from the DMA, or Direct Marketing Association, HS2 and Edelman. Your support means that as a principle, we can always offer these resources free to individuals. But when we are a not-for-profit, we're very keen to continue growing our reach and developing new products and support mechanisms for the products we've already got out there. So we do need further funding. So if your organisation would like to get involved, please do get in touch to find out more. So today's event, as with all of our events, will be fast-paced and direct, and it's all about learning and collaboration. So there'll be some interactive polls. You'll hear from some fantastic speakers sharing what's worked in their experience. There'll be collaborative discussion groups, a short Q&A, and we will close circa 1:45. So today's session and all of our sessions always start with a poll, just so people can get an idea of who's in the virtual room and what our priorities are. So Claire, if you'd launch that poll for us, please. In terms of who is in the room, we are 47% ethnic minorities, 51% allies. I'm sure you can be both, but for the sake of this, we've got 2% who'd rather not say. Why? In organisations, a really nice split here. So 12% race network leads, and of course we run a network of 1,000 race network leads. Race network members 20%, senior leader 20%, welcome. HR 21%, D&I the majority, a quarter 25%, and allies 20%. So a really nice mix of different influence points within the organisation. Question 3, how well do you think your organisation tackles race equality? Really encouraging here, a little, 31%, fairly well, 33%. Not many, 4% at not at all, and 5% at really well. So very much we're still in the middle, room for progress, but I can assure you these are more encouraging percentages than what we had this time last year and what we had in our research the year before. Do you feel your senior leaders and managers are committed to tackling race equality? 60% saying yes, only 14% saying no, and 27% unsure. Do you feel senior leaders are confident in talking about race? And this is one of the things we've seen a massive increase on in the last couple of years. What we have here, confidence is 22% confident, 33% a little bit, and still 26% or broadly a quarter not really confident in talking about race. And I can assure you, as sobering as those stats may be, they're a great deal better than they were a year ago. So the confidence and the will to do something's increased. Part of our journey is to make sure that the skills to make that land and to move it past performative narratives and into real behavioural change is also shared and embedded in organisational leadership. We've got 57% of organisations who, in the words of our members today, talk and do a little bit of action, and only 1% that does nothing. So in terms of organisations addressing race inequality, again, much more being done. Is your organisation trying to address the bias in recruitment? The majority here is a fair amount, 32%, and then second is a little. So hopefully we can help move that on. The last couple of questions. Is your recruitment resulting in securing a fair representation of ethnic minority talent? Not at all, 10%, not enough, 33%, and then quite a broad spread. So only 6% saying a great deal, but 18% saying a fair amount. So quite a broad spread, as you'd expect from the mixed audience. How well does your organisation support ethnic minority employees to develop and progress? Not enough, 25%, a little, 27%, a fair amount, 23%. And then finally, before we get into the meat of things, why doesn't your organisation tackle bias in recruitment, development, progression? The biggest one here, as you'd expect, is it does not know how to, 35%. Unfortunately, there's still 14% who are saying it's either racism or discrimination from the top, or racism or discrimination for those who have the power to make the difference. So sobering. And for those of you who request the full recording, of course, you'll get the stats on that as well. So if I could have the next slide, please. Just to give you a little background on us, in case you're new to our events, we created Race Equality Matters in response to what we call the moment in the summer of 2020. We didn't want to look back and see that in the end, the summer of 2020 was just another moment of corporate black screens and organizations wanting to do something, but that's something just being focused on marketing and making money as opposed to on real social value. Since then, we've been listening and co-creating impactful concepts and solutions in collaboration with those with real deep lived experience, collaborated with other campaigns, made it easy for people to do things that are proven to make a difference. Race Equality Week is one of those solutions. We launched it last year, and we're delighted to be celebrating the second Race Equality Week with you today. The NFP, Race Equality Matters, aims to be a catalyst to move organisations and individuals from conversations to meaningful action that not just has a real impact, but is designed to work in that culture, in that organisation, in that industry, because cutting and pasting does not work. So we're going to share a quick video that explains a little bit more about what we do.
Race Equality Matters co-create solutions with those with lived experience. This includes providing how to do it right guides and workshops that show and support you to be able to implement and deliver the solutions. Trailblazers. We identify, celebrate and champion individuals and organisations that are making an impact. Buddy circles. Small support groups who collaborate to implement a Race Equality Matters solution with the support of the Race Equality Matters team and the Trailblazer. Race Network Leads and Future Leads Networking Series, a UK-wide collaborative to learn, inspire, network and empower each other to tackle race inequality. Thought leadership events, themed on what stakeholders need. You will hear from experts, organisations and trailblazers on topics that are making an impact. Race Equality Week, a catalyst for ongoing change. Race Equality Week is a window which unites thousands of organisations and hundreds of thousands of employees and focuses senior leaders across the UK to tackle race inequality. Why get involved? You will network with and learn from a like-minded community of people working to drive race equality. 2. You will hear about the latest initiatives, best practice and successful solutions. 3. You will access free and impactful solutions to drive race equality.
So on to today's event, Tackling Bias in Recruitment, Progression and Development. This is one of the top 2 topics selected by the Race Equality Matters community, and it's something that's close to my heart. At Green Park, now the 66th largest recruitment business in the UK and the largest minority-owned firm, we've been analysing the diversity of the FTSE 100 senior leadership since 2014. One of the most significant findings from our 2020 survey was, for the first time since we began that analysis in 2014, the UK's largest companies had no black CEO, chair or CFO. So in that top 3 positions, there was no black representation whatsoever for the first time in 6 years. So that has remained unchanged in our 2021 survey. So at the top of our largest institutions, we've got less racial representation than we've had for the last 6 years. So what does that say, given all of the hand-wringing and corporate do-gooding and investments in pipelining? It got worse when we looked at the level below CEO, CFO, and chair roles. When we're looking at the top 20 succession plan 2 boards, it remained at only 3.7%, with only one additional ethnic minority leader added since 2014. So a net sum game. We're exporting some ethnic minority talent abroad into smaller, more innovative companies, but we are hiring to stand still. So that is an addition of just one person at that top echelon in the FTSE 100, or plus one person in the last 7 years. So does that say that organizations really care? Does it say they don't know what to do? Does it say that their supply chain is inherently not correct? Given the corporate narrative and commitment to diversity, equality, and inclusion, it's hugely disappointing that there's been so little improvement in racial diversity at the most senior level. In a recent poll by Race Equality Matters, 63% of respondents said they did feel senior leaders and managers were committed to tackling racial equality. But of those polled at our race network leads, the 1,000 race network leads and future leaders in the event this January, they felt that despite all the activity of the last 2 years, only 21% felt their senior and middle management are confident talking about race. So if you compare that number to the poll we did at the beginning, where there was quite a broad acceptance of diversity confidence, when you take that into race network leads, there's only 21% of them who are drinking the Kool-Aid. So this has a direct impact on improving both the diversity of boards, leadership teams, and the broader talent pipeline. So it's time to transform words and will into skill, action, and ultimately evidenceable results. PR gesturing is not enough. There needs to be new thinking and new ways to deliver that change. We must all be better and more comfortable in talking about race, and not just listen, but actually hear what our colleagues from ethnic minority backgrounds and committed allies are saying to create the change and to challenge the behaviours and critically the systems that create barriers for talent to progress and to stay within organisations. As Race Equality Matters is focused on action, not words, this is a key theme of this year's Race Equality Week. So we're delighted to have with us today some diversity and inclusion recruitment experts that are committed to sharing some of their experiences and driving this change, with a focus on tackling biased recruitment, progression, and development to address race inequality. So I'm now going to hand over to Javed, who's going to introduce you to some of these speakers.
Thank you, Raj, and a warm welcome to you all. Just one thing people have been asking, for members of the Race Equality Matters community, you will get access to the recording afterwards. So if you're not a member, you do join up and it's free. Otherwise, you'll have to wait and get it as a Christmas present. As Raj mentioned, this week's theme is action, not words, and it was determined by the Race Equality Matters community. So we hope that you leave today's event inspired with some tools and ideas to take action and drive real change. So without further ado, on to our first speaker, and I'm delighted to introduce Frank Douglas, delighted that he's here with us. Frank, born in Mississippi and spent the major part of his professional and personal life in New York City. Frank, if you want to unmute yourself so we're ready to go. For the last 20 years, he's lived and worked outside the US, over 17 years in the UK, and most recently as CEO of Caerus Executive. Caerus Executive works with private equity firms, international companies, and professional service firms interested in maximizing the performance of their organizations through effective leadership, diversity, inclusion, and transformational HR programs. And prior to this, Frank has extensive senior HR experience at Scottish Newcastle, Transport for London, and BT. Frank is the first, and we understand still the only Black male to be the Group Human Resource Director of a FTSE 100 organisation. So very special to have him here today. So a very warm welcome to Frank. And on to the first question. If we can have the spotlight on Frank, thank you. Frank, you have a wealth of experience working with organisations. Why do you think many struggle to attract and retain ethnic minority workforce?
Thanks, Javed and Raj for having me here, and welcome to everyone. So it's an interesting question, Javed, and I, having been a dyed-in-the-wool HR person, I know HR folks want a process. They want to leave here with a process they can plug and play in their organization, and some of these things aren't processes. And so why do they struggle? And with our work, and we work with major companies. We work with the largest pharmaceutical companies, the largest music companies, all four of the UK broadcasters. We partner with them from 3 to 18 months. So our insights are based on being behind the curtain. And one of the things I've realized is that after George Floyd, a lot of companies jumped on the train. Their competitors were on that train. They saw everyone on that train, so they had to jump on, and they jumped in solutioneering. Now, I know you're looking for solutions and actions, but I think that's part of the challenge. So what have I found in our clients and talking to many people is that we have to go back to basics. So one of the issues is that many people are confusing or conflating diversity and inclusion. And so I would ask you to ask 3 questions of your HR and your leadership teams. Ask your senior leaders to describe what diversity looks like in their organization. Ask them to describe what inclusion looks like in their organization. And more importantly, ask them, how does inclusion help their business objectives? Now, that may sound rather basic to you, but what I have found is that actually a lot of companies, and I even say respectfully, a lot of D&I practitioners actually conflate diversity and inclusion. And that is the starting point of the problem, is that inclusion is a fundamental reimagining of your relationship with your employees. And if you ask a lot of leaders about inclusion, their answer actually will be about diversity. You say, yeah, how does inclusion help you? They will say, well, because we have diverse workforce and we have different opinions. No, that's not inclusion, that's diversity. So part of the struggle, I know it sounds rather basic, but part of it is that we actually don't understand the lexicon of the issues. And what inclusion is a fundamental challenge to the status quo. The other thing I would say about inclusion and why we struggle is that if you run your organization in a hierarchical manner, that's a barrier to inclusion. And most organizations, they have all these D&I initiatives, and they still run it in a hierarchical manner and believe they're being inclusive. But as you go up the pyramid, and if you hold your meetings just with your top senior leaders and the grade below, it's not representative. The other challenge I would say, Javed, very quickly, is the other confusion is that we don't really understand the difference between assimilation versus inclusion. And what many companies are doing are putting in programs to fast track assimilation. And assimilation is, this is who we are. We have this diverse talent pool. We're going to put in programs and initiatives to help them fit into us. Inclusion says, we have this diverse talent pool, women, ethnic minorities, disabled, age, and others. And what we're going to do is find out how we have to change our way of doing business, thinking, to accommodate and leverage that talent pool. And so the other challenge is that we still haven't really cracked the nut between assimilation versus inclusion. And then lastly, retention, and this goes throughout all of this, it's about leadership behaviors. Leadership behaviors are not really a part of the conversation as much as they should be. It's unconscious bias, it's a training, it's a workshop, it's a new policy, it's a new initiative. And then the 10 folks in the executive suite, next agenda item, we signed off on that, and they go about business as usual in their hierarchical way. So there's some basic issues that I think are the challenge, Javed, in terms of understanding diversity and inclusion and understanding what inclusion really means. It's not tick box, it's a fundamental challenge to the status quo.
Thank you. And you touched upon it. So a number of organizations kind of roll out initiatives or I call pop-ups to tackle race inequality, and they don't work or they don't make an impact. You touched upon some questions that when we had a good conversation before, you said there's some key questions that need to be asking before implementing the initiatives.
I think there's one key question every organization needs to answer first in terms of their executive team, where it starts. And that is, where are they on the myth of meritocracy? Do they believe in the myth of meritocracy, which is able-bodied white men are the most talented people in the world? Or are they prepared to challenge the myth of meritocracy, which says, nah, there's got to be something else at play here? That is the most determinant question I have found in terms of those organizations that are serious and moving into all and those that are not. So the first question is, where are they on the myth of meritocracy? And so what you find is some companies actually, they believe in it. You know, they believe that, you know, in the myth of meritocracy, we got the best people. If they're all white men who live in the home counties, so be it. And then there's others who have the humility and curiosity to take that step back and say, something's not right here. The other challenge, and you've mentioned part of the other issue, is that many companies, because the need to show action, have used off-the-shelf solutions. And Raj has alluded to that already, is that what we have found is that inclusion and culture, progression and retention are specific to a company. It's not even an industry issue. As I said, we've done deep dive work with the 4 major broadcasters, pharmaceutical companies, music industry. There's very little that's an industry issue. You know, they have different HR policies, they have different leadership styles, they have different engagement programs. And so it's the it's the one size fits all that has been a barrier to success because it's not specific to the needs of their workforce. It would be like going to the GP and he or she gives you percent penicillin because penicillin is a good medicine. It cures a lot of things. Yeah, but I got a broken leg. You know, so it has to be specific to that. The other issue is that we need to acknowledge that gender is different from race. And a lot of companies believe that we can use what we did for gender and, you know, move those sort of initiatives and approach to race. It's totally different. And in fact, I have to say I was disappointed at the last Parker review where they stated that, you know, part of what they should be building on is the lessons learned from, you know, the gender movement. It's not the same. So let me just give you this rather penetrating glimpse at the obvious. Every white man knows a white woman. Penetrating glimpse of the obvious. But the point is that most white C-suite executives have women in their professional orbit, and most white C-suite executives have women in their personal orbit. Very few white C-suite executives have ethnic minorities in their professional orbit, as Raj has rattled off the statistics, and even less so have them in their personal orbit. That distance creates stereotypes, it creates discomfort, it creates a lack of confidence and capability in dealing with the issue. So part of what companies also need to understand is success in gender does not mean you're going to be successful in dealing with the race issue. And then I guess the last thing I would say is the equity issue. Companies and HR policies are still monolithic. They're one policy that applies to everyone. And clearly, if you're going to be focused on equity, you need to put it where it's needed. Now, that's an interesting point because actually, if you've sat in on executive team meetings deal with equity every day. They deal with equity every day. And you know what it's called? It's called resource allocation and capital allocation. Every CEO deals with that every day. Where are we going to put our resources and our capital? We got one machine producing 10 widgets and another producing 7. Let's find out what's happening with that 7-widget machine. We do that until it comes to talent. For some reason, when we get to the talent conversation, we abandon that discipline of resource and capital allocation. And what you find is that, you know, those who suffer the most are the underrepresented employees. So there's a discipline there, but as I said, there's a discomfort in the race issue, and you need to challenge that and understand that. And you also need to understand, is the company serious about challenging the myth of meritocracy?
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. So drawing on your experience, what have you seen has the greatest impact when it comes to tackling biasness in recruitment, progression, and promotion?
Yeah, and I know the audience is going to be looking for a process they can walk away with, but it's it's not a process. You know, I worked at Shell, and when I moved, you know, Shell at the time had a gold-plated talent management process. And someone said, well, can you give us the Shell process? And I said, no, because it's not a process. It's about the leader. It's what's on a leadership agenda. It's what they talk about. It's how often they talk about it. And so what really moves the dial here is the starting point, is that you need to start with the voice of the employee. You don't start with a 2-day away day with your top 10 senior leaders coming up with a D&I strategy that they roll out to the organization. You start with marketers do. You start with the voice of the customer, and the customer in the workforce is your employees. You find out what's specific to them. What are their challenges? What are the things they feel in the organization? What are the things they see? Do they see unfair secondments taking place that impact them down the road? Have they had to anglicize and shorten their name for the assimilation part of the culture? Because the culture is not really, you know, looking to fit them into a new way of working. And so that voice of the employee is very important. The other thing is that you always need to ask yourself, oh, is what we're doing informative or transformative? And so, you know, there's some informative things that are very helpful and needed, but you need to distinguish between informative and transformative. And the challenge there again is that most of the efforts in many companies has been on the informative, because they have not taken the step of challenging the myth of meritocracy, the focus on hierarchy, and their fundamental reimagining of their relationship with their staff. And so, you know, if I look at some of our clients, you know, Warner Music, Universal Music, Universal being the largest of the two. What's interesting about them is they both recently IPO'd. And so they're at the top of their game. But in both their cases, they were willing to take that step back and do the deep thinking and have the humility of curiosity, saying, well, what got us here in the past may not keep us there in the future. So let's really think about the new culture, the new evolution that we need in our organization. That humility and commitment is very important. The other things I look at, Hogan Lovel is one of our clients in the law firms. One of the things we found there, it's very subtle. It's not always obvious things. It's what I call goes without saying. Ethnic minorities, Black trainees, did they really understand what it took to be a partner? You know, because in the magic circle in law firms, there was always this assumption, it goes without saying, everyone wants to be a partner. Well, if you're a first generation versus a second or third generation lawyer, you may not really understand that. And so they put in a program, for example, called Demystifying the Partnership. And so it's a host of things. You need to start with the voice of employees to understand, you know, where they're coming from. You need to be sure that the CEO and the leadership team are really interested in this. It's not lukewarm acceptance. And I think that's the challenge, is that most companies can't outright reject the race agenda. So the next step up is lukewarm acceptance. And that's where I think we're stuck at. And so the issue is, are you at lukewarm acceptance, or are you at embracing and engaging and understanding it? So it's about a commitment. It's not a process, Javed. And I know, you know, people are looking for something they can go back with, but I think that's the problem. We have jumped to solutioneering a little bit quick and not done the commitment. So one last thing, I know my time's running out. It's one of the things that many companies do is diverse recruitment panels, for example. Now, let me tell you what I found in diverse recruitment panels. 9 times out of 10, they don't work. Why don't they work? Because what we've told people is go find a diverse employee to put on the panel. Well, given the nature of most organizations, women and ethnic minorities in particular tend to be lower down on the pyramid. So you put them on that recruitment panel, and guess what? The hiring manager is still more senior than that diverse member of the recruitment panel. And when push comes to shove and the hiring decision has to be made, the ethnic minority will not change that decision. So, solution, if you want to really have impact in a diverse recruitment panel, the ethnic minority needs to be equal or senior to the hiring manager making that decision. Otherwise, hierarchy will win.
Thank you, Frank. And so Frank will be around for some Q&As with time at the end. A couple of things I've picked up. One is actually, information versus transformation. Yeah, all about action. We need more action. Absolutely. I think the other thing is with a lot of people here from the NHS, so the penicillin isn't working. So yeah, you do have to try something different. I work that bit out. Thank you much, Frank. Appreciate it. Just conscious of time. What we will do is we'll go straight on to our next double act here. Joe Heath and Ian Benjamin. If you can go on to unmute yourselves. So Joe Heath is partner, head of practice, D&I culture and ethics at Green Park, also known as DICE. Joe is an equity law improvement professional and a diversity inclusion auditor working in this field for over 20 years. She's worked with global organizations in private, public and third sectors, carrying out complex inclusion audits and cultural impact assessments. So not diversity audits, but inclusion audits. Her clients have included Linklaters, HSBC, Office for National Statistics, Amnesty International, BT Group, and EDF Energy, to name just a few. We also have joining us Ian Benjamin, who's the Managing Director of Digital Execs. Ian's an experienced headhunter and recruiter of mid to senior level digital talent in the UK, Europe, and the US. He's over 10 years experience in this space, and his focus is to recruit Black and ethnic digital talent for inclusive employers, typically digital and tech firms and from the creative sector. Ian is also the owner and host of the Digital Hub podcast, focused on ED&I issues with guests from the digital sector. I think he'll have it in his background, as you can see. So a very warm welcome to you both. For this part, we're going to focus on recruitment. So if I can just start off with Joe, we're going to have a spotlight on Joe. Thank you. Joe, what would you cite as key organizational and behavioral barriers that organizations face when recruiting ethnic minority talent at all levels?
Thanks, Javed. And honestly, Frank, I didn't pinch your material. I did write this last night, but there's lots of crossovers with what you shared. So for me, there sadly are a number of barriers, but what I wanted to do is reflect on perhaps the top five that we identify fairly consistently across our culture and inclusion audit. So the first one is that we still seem to see a huge issue in terms of an organisation having an ingrained cultural fit. So this is present in their evaluation of candidates and in the decisions that they make about succession planning and also future promotions. And many of the diverse employees at all levels that we engage with, they regularly state that there is this prevalence of a culture fit mentality and almost a set of unwritten rules that describe the attributes expected of future leaders. And many of those just simply find it impossible to break into. Now, what's interesting about this is it of course isn't about a wonderful set of skills and capabilities that need to be demonstrated. It's actually much more linked to the comfort levels of the dominant communities that go on to recruit and promote in their own image. We often hear about them not wanting to lower the bar or compromise on quality, or we need the best person for the job. So, to align to what Frank said as well. But actually, when you unravel that, when you indeed put it to the test, you see that many diverse candidates will outperform their counterparts, as is also the case when you assess candidates from a non-red brick university who also seem to outperform. So we can dismantle that myth, but it's still there in its entirety. The second area is that recruiters and hiring managers often don't really have a good understanding of the barriers that ethnic diverse talent can face, whether that's career gaps or more frequent moves from one organisation to the other, whether it's differences in education or perhaps qualifications obtained from abroad. All of these things can often be seen quite negatively by UK-based recruiters and hiring managers, which doesn't take into account the disadvantages that some candidates may have experienced in other organisations for them to feel not included and having to move more frequently. The third area, which of course, Frank has already touched upon, which is that organisations and their leaders are not racially fluent and they're not confident in engaging with ethnic minority candidates. So sometimes their targeted efforts around recruitment can come across very inauthentic and tokenistic. And this simply puts off high calibre, quality, diverse talent who just want to be valued for their skills. The fourth one for me is around external brand perception and also employee value proposition. And if an organisation has a reputation of being very white, ethnically diverse talent are simply likely to look elsewhere. So the lack of visible diversity at senior levels, which plays out on their websites, the lack of role models potentially, the lack of diversity in imagery and communications and on interview panels, and all of those things affect the level to which we perceive a company to be inclusive and diverse. They also don't really tailor their employee value proposition to the different strands to be more attractive. And in order to do that accurately, it's not just someone in marketing that makes that decision. It is about engaging and hearing the voice of the employee and the customer who is of that diversity background. And then finally for me, and I'm sure this has been articulated far better by Frank, it is that organisations, whether proactively or organically, have appeared to focus much more on attracting diversity, but they've paid very little attention to creating that inclusive environment. And they've just kind of expected that a diverse set of individuals will come into an organisation, will fit, will thrive, progress and succeed. And sadly, we find through our audits that that's not the case. For many of those individuals, they land in an organisation that isn't an inclusive ecosystem. They don't have that sense of belonging. And ultimately, they start to dial down aspects of their cultural identity. And I've seen this starting as early as the first interview. And ultimately, what that relates to and ends up being is higher levels of attrition for those diverse groups, and ultimately going against an organisation's stated aspirations around diversity. So that for me is my top 5, Javed, but could have gone on a lot longer, of course.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I think especially a couple of your points leads nicely into Ian, whose focus is on engaging, attracting Black and ethnic minorities in the digital and creative sectors. So Ian, many organisations do struggle to attract this talent. Can you tell us how you go about doing it?
Cool. First of all, I just want to say thank you for inviting me to be part of this today, and to Raj, yourself and Donna and the team. So sure, happy to kind of contribute, and hope everyone can kind of get some value from this. So, I mean, Frank alluded to this a few minutes ago that BLM, George Floyd, a lot of corporations have jumped on the bandwagon, if you like, and how much of their commitment to diversity, inclusion from a hiring perspective is authentic. And from my experience over the last 2 years nearly, it's few and far between, few and far between. And a lot of them are kind of conducted a bit of a checkbox type of exercise, as I think kind of like Frank alluded to as well. So the individual clients that or the individual candidates that I've reached out to over the years for any sort of vacancy within the digital space, and it could be a great vacancy that I have, and I reach out to a young Black lady or a Black male or an Asian male or whatever. And the issue is they tend to sit on their hands when presented with something that's amazing. And being a father of an 18-year-old boy, it worries me because this is kind of continuing to happen even over the last 2 years, because reaching out to them with an opportunity, and they don't want to take that chance of being in that interview process for 4, 5, 6 weeks or even longer, and being rejected consistently and consistently and consistently. So that trust element is what companies need to put back in place with their recruitment process. If they are serious about hiring Black and ethnic individuals, the trust element needs to be there from the outset in terms of how they show their authenticity and trust. And so what I have done with my clients is to work with them by getting them involved in the hiring process from the outset. So when I'm reaching out to a candidate about a vacancy, the collateral, the material, or even better, the videos that we produce collectively, in some instances, they're just on Zoom recordings where members of the team that may be of color or maybe not, or maybe part of their D&I team, are talking about why they joined the company, talking about the values of that company, talking about what problems that company solves, but also, essentially the individuals that I'm reaching out to that are candidates can see individuals that look like them, that work in an organization. And that is what's going to instill the trust that is gone from a lot of individuals who are essentially sitting on their hands and not developing their careers. And regrettably, something that I see on a daily basis and weekly basis, and I have done for many, many years. And I was hoping over the last couple of years that would start to kind of to be eradicated, and it hasn't as of yet, because the authenticity from a lot of employers isn't really real. I'm not saying all employers. I mean, some of my clients I work with, I have got D&I committees set up in place, etc., and so forth, and the dial is being turned in the right direction. But Black and ethnic candidates need to feel as though this company really is real. They are sincerely doing something. They want to improve it. They want it from the top down, from the board that we spoke about earlier as well, and it's going to filter down through the organisation. How do they know that's really going to happen? And so in terms of that candidate attraction journey, that's where I encourage my clients to do that, in terms of showing individuals that there are ethnic minorities already in the companies, enjoying their careers. They're not going to be jumping jobs every 3 years, where as opposed to a white individual that's typically 5 years. Black and ethnic individuals are statistically known to move jobs more frequently because of that, because they're not getting up the ladder as more often as white individuals. So showcasing the company's authenticity in terms of D&I, what their commitment really is in terms of learning and embracing other cultures, and getting that in the collateral, in the video that's a couple of minutes long, for example, and that allows me as a headhunter to reach out and show the candidates, look, there are people there that about you. So that's what I do on a regular basis, and that's what I encourage companies to do, because the trust is gone, and it's just, how can I say, it's hard for me to accept it sometimes when I'm speaking to a candidate about a role that's an absolute shoo-in for that individual, and I go, no, I'm done. I don't want to go for that journey anymore, Ian. I'm not going to go for it anymore, Ian. I've done it 8 or 9 times or whatever, and they just can't go for that anymore. And so to build that trust visually and authentically, to showcase the authenticity of that employer, is what I recommend to help bridge that gap.
Thank you. And not just recruitment, trust is a common thing I'm hearing about making or removing the barriers of exclusion or making things inclusion. So trust is absolutely the heart of things. So building on that, Joe, what has Green Park and or DICE done to support organisations to remove some of the barriers that is impacting on progression and recruitment?
Yeah, thank you, Javed. I really reiterate on kind of Ian's point there around the trust. I think building trust internally, but also individuals have had negative experience going through recruitment process previously. It's really important that kind of brand damage is repaired. So what have we done? So we've done numerous end-to-end reviews and cultural audits. And the point of that is to really get under the skin of the pain points. An organisation will have some assumption where bias may exist across their recruitment journey or the employee experience, but actually it's sometimes misplaced. Sometimes there are some less obvious places by which there needs to be some solutions put in place. So our audits normally reveal 2 types of recommendation. One are process changes and the other are behavioural changes. But I guess to get really under the skin, we've got to work really closely with the people making the decisions. So that will be the internal recruiters and the hiring managers in this case. And we've worked incredibly hard to really encourage them to think and act differently about talent and to get them to apply this different lens in their thinking. So we talk a lot about how they need to start viewing talent from the perspective of culture add versus culture fit. So many of us would have heard this statement of culture fit. No one can really define it. It's more of a feeling, but actually it makes no sense. And when we think about fit, we think about the same. When we think about add, we think about different. So if we want to get some different outcomes, we can't just keep doing the same. So we talk about how an individual candidate can be additive to the existing culture. And that has started to, I guess, ring true to a lot of recruiters to guess be a bit more broader in their considerations. We've already, had some level of discussion about the fluency and the fear factor that some, particularly white leaders and managers, are feeling at the moment. We know there is a fear of engaging with difference more broadly, but particularly in having conversations around race. So how on earth does that play out in an interview process? If they fear that they won't be credible in understanding someone's lived experience because their frame of reference is simply so different, or they fear they'll have the right language or terminology to engage, this absolutely means that candidates will have a different experience and for no fault of their own. So we've worked really hard to turn that fear associated with race into curiosity. And for us, that's the first step in really building cultural connectivity. We also, and I think, again, Frank touched upon a particular initiative, which is about diverse interview panels. Now, we could argue whether we think that's progressive or not, whether we've seen effectiveness in that. But I guess I've seen it on both sides. I've seen where it's had no impact, and I've seen where it's been quite transformational. But I just want to share a really, really quick example with you. In a recent audit with a very large client who had actually implemented diverse panels. In fact, they've gone a step further. They mandated ethnically diverse members to be part of that panel. Now, unfortunately, when we did our review, whilst they, waxed lyrical about how great this was as an initiative, sadly, what we found is it had not had the desired results. Those individuals, to Frank's point, hadn't had the traction, hadn't had the influence. Unfortunately, it hadn't moved the dial in terms of the diversity profile. And actually, whilst, yes, of course, the hierarchy piece come into play, it was also just about numbers. So the reality is there's going to be probably one diverse person on a non-diverse panel, and that panel could be 5 or 6 people in total. And what we found when we spoke to those individuals is whilst they tried to have influence, whilst they tried to challenge, the organisation and the rest of the panel just simply wasn't up for the challenge. In fact, what they could see is first-hand affinity bias playing out in front of them. And eventually what happens when we keep trying and we don't get anywhere is we conform. And actually what we found is even for the diverse member on that panel, they started to adopt another level of bias themselves, which we would call conformity bias, where they simply gave up challenge and just conform with the status quo. So they jumped in on allowing that unfair decision to be made and perhaps bias to be sort of reflected in the process. So that for me is a quick kind of recap on some of the things that we've done, Javed. Thank you.
Thank you. And just on that, someone said to me, and I've never heard anyone do it, if I'm recruiting for someone, I shouldn't be on the panels. So my bias will not be involved in that, and other people can be more, what's the word, neutral to it, saying actually Javed may not like this person, but they're ideal for the team. So just an interesting thing, but I've never heard anyone do it, but I do understand that. Thank you. Just conscious of time, Ian, I'm going to have to ask you to do this in 60 seconds, if that's okay.
Here we go.
Just building, because you've covered quite a lot actually, but just building on, do you have any other recommendations for organizations that want to recruit more employees from the ethnic minority backgrounds?
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be around getting involved at different points. If they're serious about it, getting involved at different points of the candidate journey. So, for example, if somebody applies for a vacancy, and or for example, having a non-biased applicant tracking system that takes out the names or the different red brick universities, etc., takes that data away from their CV, and then it's looked upon as being what it is. Do you know what I mean? So there's no perceptions in the process. That's something that's been a couple of my clients do that right now. Something that's been introduced more and more and more. Yeah, don't just plonk a video on the website about how diverse you are as a company. Get it in, use that communication tool as part of the candidate attraction journey. Use it because it works, and it's not that hard to do and to implement with a headhunter like myself or with whatever your internal recruiters. Do that, and because it wins. Individuals like to see who's there. But yeah, definitely non-biased applicant tracking systems is one way. I've only got 60 seconds, so I've got to shut up, but I could talk about it all day long. So thanks for the opportunity.
Brilliant, thanks. And we hope we can get a sort of question towards the end that we can pick up on that. So thank you very much, everyone, for that. If everyone just wants to go into the chat and just say what they've experienced or seen or been aware of that does make a difference. So this is not no negative thing, because we know there's enough data out there. It's just what have you seen that's observed. What we will do with everyone afterwards, we will collate it and share it. So if you don't contribute, you don't get. So if everyone just goes into the chat. And then just put, a couple of points that of what they've seen has been working. We'll give this like a good couple of minutes, okay?
Yeah, there's some fantastic things in the chat already. I mean, there's a debate about name blind CVs. Yeah. Why do I have to hide my identity to work for your company? The conversation about having people on the panel, there's lots of different views on that. One of them is, if my line manager is so biased he can't take part in the panel, or she can't take part in the panel, what does that say when it comes to that bias manifesting itself after I've been employed? So lots of complexity here.
Brilliant. So I said our whole thing is all about collaboration. So, I think we've got over 500 people here, so there could be 500 ideas come through, and obviously there may be a number that are consistent, and if they're working, we will share all this with yourselves.
Yeah, absolutely, and some good questions from the group as well. Javed, do you want to leave this run for a little bit, or do you want to move on? I'm just noticing time, and we didn't say we'd have a hard line.
So while people finish that off, what we'll do is introduce our next and very fantastic supporter of Race Equality Matter, our next speaker. Carol, if you can just unmute yourself, please. So it's Carol Elderfield from HR Director Affiliates Group of AMY PLC. Carol's a business-focused HR director who creates impactful people solutions to deliver organizational objectives. She's worked across numerous sectors: retail, food, manufacturing, distribution, and rails, a whole range. She's working with AMY, which is a leading infrastructure services and engineering company, to support their inclusion agenda, driving change to improve performance. So a very warm welcome to Carol. When it comes to tackling progression and development, so once people are through the door of ethnic minority colleagues, many organizations implement initiatives without understanding what are the real barriers and don't work. AMY sought out the onset to identify what these barriers, and you did it through Safe Space. Do you want to explain a bit more about it, please, Carol?
Yeah, so we, after the George Floyd events, we didn't really take any actions immediately because we hadn't really heard from our ethnic communities' voices, really. So we were looking for a great opportunity to do that. So we used Safe Space, and Safe Space was an initiative where we pulled together a couple of our executive team, some of our senior leaders, and we invited people from our multicultural affinity group to talk to us about what the main barriers were to progression, to being heard, culture, what wasn't working in AMY for those employees to feel that A, they belonged, B, they could progress in our organisation, and C, actually, how did we attract people in the first place? And whilst our inclusion strategy had been developed by people in the organisation, it didn't meet their needs, and they changed at least 5 elements of that inclusion approach. And a big part of that was recruitment, development, not just for them, but for the leaders in the organisation. And we very swiftly put into place the actions that the multicultural group had suggested, which included coaching the top 100 leaders in what it really felt like to be a multicultural employee in a predominantly male, white environment. So the impact was felt almost immediately after we had run that Safe Space. And the Safe Space was facilitated by an external provider. I chose a coach. I went for someone who was a coach who was an ethnic minority individual herself. And we set that space up to be completely confidential, to enable people to understand that there would be no repercussions, because sometimes when you speak out, something can happen afterwards. And we made sure that those individuals felt that it was truly a safe space to really start to change the culture within Amy, which we had been working hard to do. We were moving from a very hierarchical culture to a truly empowered organisation, and we have been doing so for the last 2 years.
Thank you, Carol. And for those Race Equality Matters co-created safe space in partnership with Mental Health First Aid England to make sure people are safe to have these uncomfortable and challenging conversations, but trust is key to it. And also I think what Carol alluded to is what Frank said earlier about, knowing your customers, and in this case your employees, what are their thoughts, feelings, concerns. So from running Safe Space, Carol, what have you done, and from the findings or what you discovered, what have you done to encourage and enable the promotion and progression of ethnic minority employees?
It's been variable, and I think, as Frank said, it's not a process. It's so we don't have a silver bullet. We've got, in our organisation, we've got 5 different businesses, so it's worked to a differing degree in each of those organisations. We don't set rules and regulations for each of those organisations within our inclusion framework. They work to the maturity of each of those businesses. In our professional services business, we've had huge success. We have representation at every level in our organisation, and we, the ethnic community, are above the percentages of ethnic minorities within the UK. So we're at over 37% ethnic minority representation in professional services. However, we're only at 5% in our strategic infrastructure business. And when we look at why that is, it's not because we're not attracting people in. So we look at the statistics of attracting people in. It's because we're not hiring. And I think that is very much about the leaders are recruiting in their own image. So we're developing a program with an external provider at the moment, which will enable people to understand why they're recruiting in their own image and why it's okay not to do that. And it's a cultural, again, it's another part of our cultural change. We are also going to be targeting a number of roles which are only going to be for underrepresented groups. That includes ethnic minority population and women, because we're underrepresented in women. And those roles will be targeted for those people, and they will be at middle management level so that we can start to build that pipeline into senior management roles and onto the executive committee. We do have representation on the executive committee, both at ethnic minority and also in female groups. We have switched our employee voice. We're pulling all of our affinity groups together under what we're calling Lead to Engage. So all of the affinity groups will pull in under a Lead to Engage initiative, where the voices are truly going to be heard from bottom up and filter up through to the executive. So we're turning all of the hierarchical processes on its head. The other thing that we're doing is something that you talked about, Ian, which is we're redesigning our ATS system. We've got to design as much of the bias out as we possibly can. So we're putting a new system in, designing the bias out, taking as many of the decision points away from the leaders that we possibly can in order to simplify the process and get more candidates through. We're redesigning our employer value proposition. And certainly now I feel that culturally we're in a better place to be able to say, bring that talent in, because if we'd have brought it in previously, the people would have floundered and would have left us anyway. And you'll notice that, or you may notice that this year for Race Equality Matters, I've actually got Amanda Fisher, our Chief Executive, talking about Race Equality Matters. I didn't do that last year because I didn't feel that we were at a point in our journey where we should be talking about Amy being an organisation that people would want to come and work in. This year, I do feel that we are. So that's the sort of thing that we've been doing. But as every speaker has said, it's a cultural journey, and we have a number of businesses that are at different points in that journey.
Thank you. And I've sort of heard your CEO speaking, in echoes what Frank says, about equity. More investment is going to the areas where there's greater struggle than being evenly distributed. If you say that, and I appreciate it's a journey, silly days. What impacts have you seen?
Well, we're definitely seeing more ethnic representation in our organisation. We're seeing people are being promoted faster, but not in every business. So we need to get parity across the businesses. Amanda is, who's our chief executive, wants to have a monthly talent review of underrepresented groups. And she's going to be questioning why those people are not being accelerated. We're also removing some of the process barriers. So we are taking out, so one of the things we do, Joe, which you'll find interesting, is we do put loads of criteria that you have to get through before you can get a job. So you've got to have 101 different things, special skills that you've had before you can get a job. What we're saying is, if somebody's 60% ready, you take a chance on them, because an ethnic minority candidate or a woman is not going to have those 100 pieces of experience behind them. We're also removing any salary discussions, so that we get that equity in salary, because we published our ethnic pay gap, and we don't really have an ethnic pay gap, but we do in bonus, because we don't have enough representation at management level. So at a simple back to basics level, we're removing some of those ridiculous barriers that just shouldn't be there, and that plays to your kind of culture add versus your culture fit piece that you've said. I'm going to steal that and take that back to Amy, because I think that's really helpful for us.
Thank you. And just final minute, what top tip would you share as a result of your experience in this journey?
Really hear what your multicultural employees are saying to you, and utilize the insight that they give to you, and don't get it wrong. So we our ethnic minority group have said to us, we don't like the word ethnicity, use multicultural. So what did we do when we published our ethnicity pay gap? We used the words ethnicity, and they said, well, why did you do that? Because we said to you, use multicultural. And I'm kicking myself ever since I allowed that to happen, because we've dented the trust a little bit. So we spent 18 months building trust, and just by that use of that one word, we've dented that trust a little bit. So make sure that you always listen, and you always use the words that your employees want you to use.
I think showing you listening and taking
absolutely
action.
Yeah,
thank you very
absolutely
much, Carol. Brilliant. And if you want to hear more about Amy's safe space journey, we Carol and some colleagues have shared their insights from it, from the scene level, and also those with lived experience. So go to our website to find out more. Thank you very much. So what I'm going to do is hand you back to Raj. Raj, thank you. Thank you very much, Carol.
Thank you.
You're mute, Raj.
Thank you, Javed. Thank you, speakers. I hope that everyone got something from that, regardless of where they are in their company's own diversity and maturity. We've got an exciting announcement, as we've just launched a fantastic tool to support our My Name Is solution. My Name Is a free and amazing way to make everyone feel more included from the moment you interview in an organization. It works around the basic premise that mispronouncing people's names in the workplace can impact a sense of belonging and inclusivity, is bad manners, and quite frankly can also lead or be a manifestation of microaggressions. The My Name Is solution is all about phonetic name spelling on emails or other communication channels, making sure we say other people's names correctly, and creating a space where people can actually challenge your pronunciation of their names. Please check if your organization is getting colleagues' names right, the personal names of clients, customers, and suppliers, or interviewees when applying for jobs. That is, providing you haven't taken the route to making them hide their own identity to apply to you. We're looking for 100 organizations to implement My Name Is this week. So do please pledge to be part of it. We're already at 50. To aid this, we've collaborated with our partner Edelman the award-winning global PR consultancy firm. Do check them out. But they've come up with an amazing tool to support us. With their support and Green Parks, you can access this for free. So a huge thank you to them. The phonetic filter is a social tool where people upload a photo to the website and then type in their names to get a phonetic translation, an asset that can be posted on various social media channels or can just be used to make sure you pronounce people's names properly. You'll find the link and how to do it right and the guide at the phonetic filter in the chat, and also available on the Race Equality Matters website for members. I'm going to come to Frank first, please.
Unmute yourself if you're on there, Frank. Yeah.
I'm here.
Frank, thanks for your talk. As ever, a pleasure listening to you and your views. Do blind anonymous applications really work? And what can organisations realistically do to reduce the gap in recruiting and retaining minorities at a senior level?
Yeah, thank you, Raj. The two different questions. Do I think blind CVs are a good idea? And I think it's been mirrored in the chat on a direct basis. To be frank, no, because they are avoiding the basic issue. So if my wife invited a couple to dinner who I just didn't like and I hated, and she blindfolded me and had them come to my dinner table and then took the blindfold off me, do you think they're going to feel welcome? You think I'm going to feel, oh, okay, that's great? No, because she hasn't addressed the basic issue. You know, without that blindfold, I wouldn't have invited them into my orbit. And that's the issue in organizations, is that you have to go to what is it about our organization? What are the biases? What are the barriers? What are the processes? What are the leadership styles or behaviors that are making us come up with this gerrymandered solution to getting ethnic minorities into the organization? So no, you have to deal with the basic issue first. And I could go on about the unintended consequences of blind CVs in terms of female applicants, but I'll save that for another time. In terms of senior level, that's a more complex question. As I have said all along, there are no silver bullets, which means there's no silver start. So for example, every organization has an archetype of a leader, what they believe a leader should look like, their background, their pedigree. And so, for example, let's take a company where every senior leader has worked in the country outside of their country of birth. Well, if you're a mother with children, or you're an ethnic minority with a support system here in London, let's say, an expat assignment may not be a thing that is going to work for you as it might for the white male. So it's not a simple thing, but you have to unpack the unwritten rules of organizations to really get to what's holding back people at that senior level, and what are the unwritten rules and what are the archetypes of a leader that company operates under.
Thank you, Frank. Carol, a question here. How do we embed positive action at the final stages of recruitment? The person asking the question is struggling to find out the right stage of an appointment, and also is kind of worried about tokenistic or legal issues with positive action.
I think as long as it's part of a targeted succession plan, then and you can demonstrate that you are changing the shape of your organization, then it should not be an issue. We reserve the right in any recruitment process not to advertise roles internally or externally. And therefore, as long as you can demonstrate it's part of the overall management of your talent and your succession, then there should be no legal or internal issues around that. I'm happy to talk to individuals about that and how we would manage that separately if they wish.
Ian, thank you, Carol. Ian, from your perspective, working in the digital arena, lots of volume, lots of talent, how do you advise your clients to change traditional recruitment practices to more inclusive mechanisms to help you attract talent for them?
Well, yeah, I want to set the record straight as well. There's not loads of talent right now. there's a massive talent shortage, so it's quite the contrary, to be fair. But in terms of including individuals into the recruitment process, whether it's, I mentioned earlier, with the collateral, with their marketing, with the videos that I do for them, which include individuals of different ethnic backgrounds and so forth into those videos, that I then reach out to my candidates individually so they can see the people there that in our organization that look and sound and look like them, as it were. That's what I do. That's a massive part of my proposition, massive part of my, as my USP, if you like. But also if companies that are quite large, like for example, one of my clients is a large digital agency, they have a D&I committee. And so where they get together every couple of weeks over lunch and they talk about different things that they can introduce, different events they can produce into the organization. So therefore, that employer now tells future candidates what they're doing from a D&I perspective to make individuals feel more inclusive. And I do that from mental well-being as well. And I have other areas within the LGBTQ community as well. And so they're more inclusive. And so, yeah, beat that drum about your inclusive, make people aware of it. And shout from the rooftops in the communication, in the job descriptions, in your collateral. It's got to be part of your footprint going forwards.
Thank you. One for Joe Heath. Joe, your practice has become synonymous with widening the goalposts of access without lowering the bar and quality. What advice can you give to people who see their organization as really big, really complex, seeing prejudice or racism in their very bricks and mortar? How do they start by acknowledging concerns, and how then they turn that into a meaningful action plan?
Thanks, Raj. The way that we do it with them is to get under the skin by doing some kind of audit. Now, most of our clients will have some indication that something's not right. So they'll have their own engagement survey that will show some negative trends for certain groups. They've done some level of engagement. The reality is when you do that engagement internally, most of those employees will hold back to a level. They won't feel it's fully confidential. They won't feel it's impartial. So we've done big engagement programs with organisations to be that impartial external voice, to replay, anonymise their views. And as a result of that, we really get under the skin. So, for example, we get to understand, what does a microaggression really mean? How does it manifest? What impact does it have? And how does it prevent somebody from then going on to progress in their career? What of all these programs we've spoken about today, do the ethnic minority individuals really feel have had a purpose and an impact? And so by capturing that information from the voice of the people, anonymised by Green Park, we get the opportunity to create a recommendation report, a prioritisation plan, and really start to work with the organisation to build those foundations for what ends up being quite a big cultural change.
Thank you. And I'm just going to go to the panel individually before we close up with one piece of pragmatic advice that you would recommend people listening to this or joining us today try to act on, or try to evaluate whether it's right for their organisation. Joe Heath, will you go first, please?
Okay, I would, so much is hard to condense.
One time, 30 seconds.
All right, okay. I would say do not wait to find diverse talent at the point at which you've got an immediate vacancy and recruit. There is a fast-paced world by which you have to fill, and there's a lot of pressure under recruiters to do so. That doesn't, it's not conducive to finding diverse talent. There is no reason to wait. You can build future diverse talent pools. You can build relationships and curate those relationships over a time, even if you don't have any roles available. But if you know there's lack of diversity in those, pre-plan, pre-build those pools, and you can tap into them down the line.
Thank you. Ian?
I have to just echo what Joe said. Start now. So you've got that channel, you've got that image, you've got that brand that's more inclusive, whether it's from a race perspective or just got to be more inclusive. So you've got to start now, put it in place so it's believable. Believable when you hit the go button, it's believable. Start now. Start from the top down, get the buy-in. There's enough data out there to suggest it makes the companies better, financially better, etc., and so forth. Start now, change that perception, and by changing the brand, and the talent will feel authentic throughout their candidate journey.
Thank you, Ian. Carol, what would your piece of advice to our viewers today be?
Look more inside. Stop overlooking the talent you've already got, because when it leaves you, it goes on to something better. You could have given that to it.
Very good. Frank?
Thanks, Rose. And I think some great short term. So I have a longer term recommendation, which is, as you've alluded to, we have a white chairman asking a white CEO, asking a white chief people officer, asking a white HR leadership team, what do we do about race? The long-term solution is for HR to look in the mirror and earn the license to speak on this issue by diversifying itself. I can't be the last Black male chief people officer in the UK 7 years later. We need to have HR in this game and with a license to operate.
Thank you, Frank. And our own research in the leadership series by Green Park shows that diversity itself is one of the least diverse functions within the FTSE 100. So even within lower levels of diversity in HR, they're still trailing below digital and technology for diversity. So thank you very much to our speakers. Thank you all for joining us today. I hope you all got value from it. Please do join the campaign, become members, get access to the free capabilities and guidelines we put out. And to our partners, specifically those who make this all possible, BT and Green Park. Thank you to the other fantastic companies and minority-owned businesses that have helped us. To all you big corporates who are sending people, feel free to actually help us as well. To those, we're here to not just find out what the problems are, but to help create the conditions where meaningful pathways for action start small, but actually turn into something that people recognize as being meaningful and building trust. Wherever you are on your journey, please do use our services to get back on track or to create an environment for more trust around race in the workplace. And as we know, an organization who is good at race or makes progress in race and inclusion and culture is actually creating benefit for all of their employees. Remember, it doesn't end with Race Equality Week, so do check out our solutions across the year if you haven't done so already. If your organisation would like to get in touch to sponsor us or support future events or even become a partner, please do sign up on our website if you haven't registered already. This week, you can stay up to date with everything related to Race Equality Week and what's in the pipeline and beyond. So we'll share the recording for members soon. We hope to see you at Thursday's event on how to engage with senior and middle managers to tackle race and equality. You'll find a link to that and other events that are taking place in the chat. Finally, please do shout about Race Equality Week activity on your social media. This is a labour of love. No one's making any money out of this. We're providing hundreds of thousands of pounds to support for organisations for free. I hope you got something out of the time, and I hope you use 2 minutes of your time to help spread the message. Remember, it's all about action, not just words. Not many of us want to go back to normal. Thank you all and see you all soon.